further ado, thank you very much, Diane. I'm going to hand back to you, Diane, and to Pete. So Dr. Pete Shaw, who's Associate Professor in the International Centre for Environmental Science at the University of Southampton. And Diane and Pete are going to talk to us about employability and entrepreneurship and looking at implementation and the insight and findings we got from a survey of IES members. So thank you. Over to you, Pete and Diane.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a quick introduction about this particular presentation, then I will hand over to Pete for the more specific aspect of this presentation. So in response to the QAA request for feedback, IES has carried out a survey amongst its members to look at the type of competencies and the skills that, from an employer perspective, they really want the graduate or their employee to have. So this is the background of this survey. So I will now hand over to Pete to talk about what do we find from this particular survey.
Thanks very much, Diane. This is a little bit like the COVID press sessions, isn't it? Okay, so methods, just a few words on how we approach this. Standard approach using SurveyMonkey questionnaires, as many of you will be familiar. And a quick acknowledgement and thanks to our colleagues at the IES for translating the questionnaire into SurveyMonkey and distributing it to IES members. Without that, this wouldn't have happened. The questionnaire itself is fairly straightforward. We have some contextual information about the organisation responding. We ask them some basic questions about the type of graduates that they seek and routinely employ. And then we focused on the graduate skills, needs and wants. As you can see there, these are structured on the same lines as the benchmark statements. So we looked at, quite simply, at intellectual skills, practical skills, communication, and then personal and professional skills. You'll see there that we've used the term needs and wants. The idea here was to mirror the approach to person specifications and ask employers whether they considered these different skills essential or desirable. So if you think about when we complete person specifications, we think in those terms and specify something which is a must-have and would like to have. So the approach here, we echoed that and asked our respondents to really express things in those terms. Now, first of all, the respondent profile, a couple of headline statistics there for you. So mainly consultancies and mainly large organizations. The NMAX there is the maximum number of responses that we had for any questions. The data that we'll show you are distributions, so they are all percentages of the responses. These percentages exclude don't knows or null returns, and unfortunately we didn't always get 36 responses in all cases. I would also add at this stage that 36 is not really a representative sample of the environmental science profession by any means. So I would suggest that we look at the observations here as a guide, as an indication, rather than something which is a statistically robust and reliable profile. What we saw here with the graduates that people are employing tends to be skewed towards recent graduates. So most of the organisations that we spoke to employ graduates who graduated within the last 2 years. Relatively few are looking for more than 2 years postgraduate experience, so about 1 in 5 are looking for that. When we ask the minimum level of qualification, then about 2/3 are looking for qualified to at least undergraduate level. So no great surprises there, the kind of things that we would reasonably expect. We also asked them about the subjects that they favoured. This was an open question with opportunity to tick more than one box. What we have here is a ranking by subject areas. So these are basically the most popular, the most frequent subjects for degrees that are indicated by our respondents. Again, no really big surprises there. Environmental science at the top of the list, which is pretty much as expected, the kind of thing that we're all familiar with. We then have environmental management. Then we go on to more specific, less interdisciplinary subject areas, so chemistry, geology. And we also have environmental studies down there, geography, equal seventh, biology, marine sciences, then physics and maths. So there is quite a wide range in there. Again, no great surprises there that the environmental science sector looks primarily for environmental science graduates, but there are obviously a lot of opportunities for graduates of other subject areas to enter the field. When we looked at intellectual skills and other skills, the way we approached this was to present the learning outcomes and then ask our respondents to identify whether they were essential skills, desirable skills for their organisation, or whether they were neither essential nor desirable. So for all of the learning outcomes, we have similar tables with a proportion of respondents who said, yes, these are essential, or yes, these are desirable, or no, neither desirable nor essential. Now, if we look first at intellectual skills, a couple of observations which you've probably noticed already. Most of those are either essential or desirable in the view of most of our respondents. So in most cases, they are valued and wanted or needed by our respondents. If we look at that list, we won't go through this in detail, but you'll see there's a roughly equal split between essential and desirable. So the things that we have there listed as intellectual skills are not considered by all respondents to be must-have qualities or attributes of graduates. They are clearly of value, but there is no strong bias towards essential. One possible exception here is analysing, synthesising, summarising and critically evaluating information. If anything, there is a leaning towards that being a more valued, a more essential skill. If we go on and look at practical skills, what we see again here is a very, very similar pattern. The ones we have listed here, all of the learning outcomes are generally considered to be of value, either as essential or desirable skills for graduates. Only in a relatively small number of cases do we see that they are not considered essential or desirable. And again, what we see here is a very, very similar pattern to intellectual skills, in that there is a roughly equal balance between the number of people who think that each learning outcome is essential or desirable. So around 40 or 50% in all cases for all of the learning outcomes. So nothing there that comes across as a really strong winner in terms of its value to employers, and certainly nothing there that has a strong bias in any direction. If we look at communication skills, of course, these are very important in terms of curriculum delivery and the educational experience. Slightly different pattern here in that there is a stronger leaning towards certainly effective communication to audiences in different formats and interpersonal communication skills within a team context. So those two do actually come out as more essential for a high number of our respondents. Slightly different case in the issue of arguing a case in an effective manner. So more of a balance in there. So a little bit of a mixed bag in communication skills and more of a skew towards a positive view of these being essential skills. Last and by no means least, when we look at personal and professional skills, we see quite a mixed picture here. The easy part of the story is that most people consider the personal and professional skills to be of value in some way. So we don't see a lot of votes here for neither essential nor desirable, but there's actually quite a variety of profiles. So if we pick out a couple of headlines here: work effectively as a team member, recognise and respect the view of others, and an awareness of the importance of risk assessment and relevant legislation, then we have a skew towards those those attributes being more essential and desirable in the views of our respondents. That pattern is not reflected elsewhere. So if we look, for example, at developing the skills for autonomous learning, fewer of our respondents considered that to be essential, more considered it to be a desirable, a want rather than a need. And the same kind of pattern here for reflecting on the process of learning to evaluate personal strengths and weaknesses. So less of a strong view of this being a must-have skill, and more people, the majority, considering this to be something which is a value but wanted rather than necessary. Now, last one here on the list, displaying appreciation of commercial awareness or entrepreneurship. This is particularly important in the light of Diane's comments about the redrafting of the benchmark statements. This is only a small sample, but from the people who responded here, then entrepreneurship related skills, commercial awareness, tend to be regarded as a desirable rather than an essential capability by the employers who responded in this particular survey. So some interesting profiles there, and some things which are perhaps of concern and worth considering, and certainly scope for getting more from different areas, and perhaps a wider base from a wider range of respondents. So I'll now hand back to Diane for summary and conclusions, and to make a few overarching statements about what this means and where we can go with it.
Well, thank you very much, Pete. There's lots of data there that I think we can spend months to tease out, although the sample size is small, but there's some very interesting insights being provided here. So in summary, so the learning outcomes presented the match and needs of the professional environmental sector. So I think it's important to note that the essential and desirable skills varied a lot. But in my personal view, if I may, is saying that when our graduates go out to get a job, there are many times that some skills are essential, and lots of the graduates will have the essential skills, and it's the desirable skills that give them that little advantage. So I think it's important that we equip our students to have these desirable skills. Clearly, the employer seems to desire to have the good raw material and grow their own from their perspective. So here we also look at the intellectual and practical skills tend to be quite balanced across the essential and the desirable. The communication and personal professional skills are a lot mixed in these terms. So tying this results in with our benchmark statement, I think if you remember our employability skills, there are a number of areas that we flagged up: problem identification and solving, that this is clearly picked up by this survey as one of the top sort of scoring attributes, or that our employer wants from intellectual skills competency aspect. Innovation, creativity is also mentioned. Communication is specifically flagged up as an essential skill that they all want the candidates to have. So, and practical action, these are the three aspects that flagged up by the benchmark statement, and I think we reflected to most part what the employers would like to see the graduates to have. And very interestingly, in terms of the entrepreneurship, we talked about creation of cultural, social, and economic values. It's not just the economic values, and there is a big part of it from the survey that's talked about working as a team and being understanding and appreciate other people's from other people's perspective. So that's also factored by our survey. So I will hand over to you, Pete.
Can I just say you've got a couple of minutes until Q&A? Thank you.
Okay, in that case, I think we should have another couple of minutes for Q&A and give people a chance to ask questions. So thanks everyone, and hopefully there's some things we can chase up. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks, Pete and Diane. That was really valuable and reassuring to have a source of data that we can look to. So there are a couple of questions so far, but please keep them coming. So we've got from Tom: were the survey respondents given the opportunity to identify essential criteria that are missing from the list? Who would like to answer that one?
Yes, there is an open section from the survey to list what is there any desirable skill or essential skill that we haven't covered in the survey. So there is an open section that they can input into it. But I don't remember seeing specific ones that we missed from the benchmark statement. Pete?
I don't recall seeing anything that really made me kind of sit up and think, oh, yeah, because there was an open question at the end. I'll just check and see if there is anything on there, but I don't think we had any specific comments.
Thank you. And then we have an anonymous question. Not all percentage values for essential, desirable, and neither summed up to 100. Is that because, as you mentioned at the Pete start, that some employers didn't respond to that question?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, brilliant. Great, thank you. And was there anything that came out of the sort of open questions that was of value or gave some insight into what people were thinking or what their preferences were or their priorities were?
Nothing that really stands out. I think that could hark back to what Caroline was saying in her questions about what is the way forward. And we at the moment we are only looking at developing employability skills for our students, but with the new benchmark statement, we're hoping that we will be able to take entrepreneurship and enterprise integrated into the provisions, into our curriculum, to broaden it to other than just those competency skills and the perception of entrepreneurship is all about economic values.
Great, thank you, Dan. And I think hopefully we might circle back a bit more to Caroline's question in the panel session in a little while. We've got a question from Gary. Were there any noticeable differences in responses according to employer sector, e.g. consulting versus public sector versus NGO, or were the data set too small to look at that?
We haven't drilled into that. I don't think the numbers would be meaningful. So you know, with the distributions of participants, then it would be a bit shaky, to be quite honest. If we could rerun this, if there was any value in it, then certainly that would be an interesting thing to look at, and something that I think could elicit quite a lot of differences, but the data set that we have just isn't sufficiently robust.
No, but maybe something to follow up with a bigger sample size, because it's really insightful information you've collected. I've got a question from Georgie. Did you ask employers, or did they give you any information on about how they might assess graduates' capabilities in these areas at all? So how do they know? How do they test that?
I don't think that was included in our questions, and so this might be an area, as you said, to follow up if we want to take this forward. So we didn't have a special open section for them to reply to that.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see whether their approach to person specifications maps what they've told us here. Because in an ideal world, then what they're seeing as essential and desirable attributes should actually map onto person specifications. So I would assume that when employers are looking at this, then the shortlisting and decision-making process should actually follow this and work out whether people have got those capabilities.
Yeah. No, I think that'd be really interesting if we do a follow-up survey to see how that maps out. And then really, I think it's sort of, I was just wondering as well in terms of sort of, Diane sort of summed up by saying they want to take graduates and grow their own in some of these areas. So some of the areas that we might think were a little bit more advanced in terms of autonomous learning, developing career paths that seem to be less essential. Do you think that reflects the level at which they're taking employees on as the graduate level and relatively few at postgraduate level? Is that a reflection of that process, do you think, or something else?
There was an interesting outcome of a previous survey that my colleague Simon Kemp ran a while ago. And one of the front runners for graduate capabilities was the can-do attitude. So I think this actually connects with the can-do attitude that, you know, you're not looking at a graduate as a finished entity. You're looking at somebody with potential. So that can-do attitude, I think, actually encompasses taking on new areas, new challenges that you don't have strong competencies or background in. So particularly now, I think with the way that people are looking at long-term relationship with their employees and building up capability through their work, we should expect that we're going to get this kind of pattern without that kind of strong need for everything at the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's a very sensible assessment. And then we've got a final comment. There are implications in terms of how visible we make these to students so that they can present themselves in the right light. Thank you very much for doing the survey. More of this needed. And my question then is, in addition to this presentation today, are there any plans to disseminate these findings more widely so that we can share them with CHES members so that they can actually use them to sort of discuss with their students?
I think it will be a very good case study. I know the number is small, but it could still form a good case study for the benefit of the membership. Yes, I think it's a very good idea. We can write it up and use it as a resource, for example.
Yeah, so perhaps in an issue of the environmental scientist, that would be useful. And then final comment from Gary before we move on to the break. The lack of interest in self-awareness is worrying, given that this is one of the 8 key competencies for sustainability. Yeah, well, maybe that's an indication of how things have changed. Maybe our students are more competent in some areas than their employers, perhaps.